Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Nazir. Today is our 8th lesson. We are getting towards the end of Masechet Nazir. And this week we are going to be reviewing Daf 51 through 57. We are still talking about Tumat Met, which is impurity from a dead body. And our daf 51, discusses other things that convey corpse impurity. So not only a full dead body, but even the dust of a corpse. Now, it's important to understand that we're talking about a corpse that has decomposed. The Hebrew term is rekev, and that is when the corpse has decomposed. So the Gemara says that when does it convey impurity? Only if the person was buried without any clothing, which means that the decomposition is only of the body and not anything else. And the body needed to be buried either in a marble coffin or on a stone floor, meaning no part of the coffin has decomposed. But if there are other things that could have decayed with the body, then that dust that is in the ground, it does not convey corpse tum'ah. So it would not make the Nazir impure like like touching a dead body. The Gemara continues and says that this rekev is only from flesh and sinews and bones. As I mentioned, it's the decomposition of the body. It is important to note that if a body is ash, meaning if it's cremated, it does not seem to give to impurity like a dead body. So that's just interesting to understand. The Gemara says that only decayed flesh, if it's only decayed flesh without any bones, it does not convey impurity. But if you have bones and flesh, then it does make a person impure if they touch this. If two bodies were buried together, then the dust is not does not convey impurity, only one corpse. However, if they were buried separately and then decomposed separately, and then you mix this dust together, so then it does make a person impure if they touch it. If a person's hair was cut after they died and then they were buried with that hair, so now the dust that has all decomposed does not convey impurity, because hair that was attached to the body is part of the body. So if it all decomposes, then it works. But if it was cut off afterwards, now it's seen as a separate entity, and now that when that decomposes, it does not convey impurity. Teeth, hair, and nails. Again, we're talking about a body that decomposes. If the body is full and decomposes, every part of that will convey impurity. However, if there were things that were detached from the body, meaning after the person passed away, so as I mentioned, teeth, hair, nails, so if they decompose with the body, again, if they were removed and then were placed with the body, then that dust that decomposes is not going to be conveying impurity. Interesting, the Gemara asks, what about the heel of your foot? Why do they ask that? Because most people have dead skin already on the heel of their foot. One could think that that's already seen as not part of the body. Then when the whole body decomposes, we have something that was not originally part of the body. But the Gemara says no, meaning as long as it's all together, then the that dust of that body does convey impurity. Um, the Gemara asks again. Our idea is it has to be only that body. The Gemara asks, what if a woman, unfortunately, let's say, dies and she was pregnant, so she's now buried with her fetus within her? Is that seen as one corpse, and then when it decomposes again, that dust is seen as conveying impurity? Um, or is it seen as two entities, and therefore when it decomposes, it does not convey impurity? Um, so the Gemara doesn't really answer this question. It adds more questions, right? What if they ground up a corpse into dust? As I mentioned, that it does not convey corpse impurity to matmet. The only thing that would convey to matmet is if the body decomposes on its own, right? It needs to have decayed on its own, then it will convey the impurity. What if they ground it up and then it decayed? Again, the Gemara says teku. We don't really have an answer to that question. What if the corpse was missing a limb when it was buried? So then the dust does not convey impurity, and the earth around the body doesn't need to be collected, meaning we're not concerned about about the dust that or the dirt around the grave. Um, so to the opposite of that, a severed limb from a living person does not create rekev. Again, rekev being that the dust of a decomposed body. Let's say a person was buried with the severed limb, meaning it was placed together maybe in the coffin. Does that produce rekev? And the Gemara says no. Again, that severed limb was severed from a live person. Therefore, it does not, when it decomposes, it does not convey to matmet, corpse impurity. Okay, so the Gemara talks about now, since we're talking about whole and versus things that are missing limbs, so now it goes to dietary laws. And it says that if a person eats an ant, right? An ant is very tiny, but it's a complete being or creation. So if you eat a whole ant, you are liable because you ate an ant. But let's say, right, again, even if it's very small, right, it's not a kezayit, it's not the shear, it's not the amount that would normally make a person liable, but because it's a complete being, the person is liable. So the Gemara asks, what if you ate an ant who was missing a leg? So is missing a leg, the ant is missing a leg. If the ant is missing a leg, is it still considered a complete being or not? And Daf 52 tells us that the Torah teaches that you can't eat, shratzim, like creepy, crawly insects, and it uses the word with them, bahem, with them, and the Torah says that or the Gemara explains that means that they need to be whole, but it also uses the word mehem, from them. That seems to mean that they could be partial. So the shear, the amount of eating these bugs or insects, is the size of a lentil, which is pretty small. But our question with the missing leg is not resolved on this daf. The next thing we discussed last week was other things that make a person impure, specifically the Nazir. So we're up to the spine and the skull, right? This seems to be a very important part of the skeleton. So the Gemara asks, does it mean this you have to have the spine and the skull, or is it the spine or the skull? Um, so again, we're trying to understand what would make a Nazir impure. So the Gemara says that if the majority of ribs, again, we're talking about a skeleton now, so if majority of the ribs were removed from one side, so and they're not there, so then this skeleton will not convey tumat met, this impurity. But if the majority of the ribs were broken from both sides, now they're broken, they're not removed, so it would have to be from both sides, then it would not be impure. If it was broken only on one side, it would still convey impurity. But it seems that in the grave, if everything is buried together, it would convey this impurity. And it seems to imply that it's seen as all united in the grave. So now we were talking about the ribs. Those of you who know that the ribs are attached to the spine, this seems to prove that we're only talking about the spine, and then it seems that it would be either or. Or no, maybe even though we were talking about the ribs, you also need the skull as well in order to convey the tumat met. So Rabbi Akiva and the sages disagreed about 6 things if they conveyed impurity or not. And the Gemara says that he actually retracted his opinion afterwards. And then they brought this box of bones into the shul, and the doctor said, right, they looked at the bones, and the doctor said, there isn't a spinal column from one corpse here, and therefore it seems to imply that he was only looking for the spinal column, or I should say the spine, and therefore that seems to imply that you only need the spine and not the skull. And the Gemara says, no, maybe he meant skull and spine. We mentioned these 6 things. So what are the 6 things that they argued about? One is a complete limb that was taken from 2 separate corpses, meaning half the limb is from one corpse and the other half is from another, but together they create a whole limb. Again, Rabbi Akiva said that it would convey impurity. The sages said it would not. A limb from a living person, but again, from 2 separate people. A half a kav. A kav is a volume measurement. So a half a kav of bones from 2 corpses. It seems to be saying if you have that measurement from one corpse, it would convey impurity. But if you don't, then it wouldn't. And here Rabbi Akiva wanted to say that these 2 corpses combine to convey the impurity. The sages say that they don't. Again, a revi'it, a quarter log of of blood, again, from 2 corpses. Another thing is a piece of bone that is the size of a barley grain, again, which is very small, but again, made up of 2 corpses, meaning not from the same body, but from 2 separate bodies. And spine and skull from 2 bodies as well. And here the Gemara says spine and skull, or spine or skull. And again, as we mentioned, all of these things will make the Nazir impure, except for the bone the size of a barley seed, that would not do it. Rabbi Akiva did not retract the quarter log of blood from 2 bodies. He felt that still did convey impurity to the Nazir. And now we have a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel on the amount of bones, again, the volume of bones that would convey um, impurity. So one is that if you have a quarter kav of bones, and it has to be at least, this is Beit Shammai, it has to be at least two bones need to be in there. That will convey not only if you touch it, but if you're under an ohel, under a an enclosure, that would make the nazir impure. Beit Hillel say a quarter cup of bones, but it has to be from the majority of bones in a body or a majority of the frame of a person, meaning many more bones than what we suggested before. Um, Okay, so now the Gemara says, again, as I mentioned, this idea of the bones, is it from the skull and the spine as well? Um, is it, again, only from the rest of the body? But if you have the spine and the skull, then even a quarter kav would make you impure? Or there's no difference, meaning bones are bones. There isn't like more important and less important. Daf 53 tells us that Shammai says even one bone from the spine or the skull will make the Nazir tameh, impure, and this seems to be extremely stringent. The rabbis say no, you need a half a kav, not a quarter, but a half. That would make them impure, or maybe even a quarter of a kav will make the Nazir impure. Um, so the Gemara actually tells us that this was an ancient disagreement between a half a kav and a quarter of a kav. And if it makes a Nazir impure, or if only it prevents a person from eating the sacrificial meat, the kodshim, that would be an issue, but it wouldn't necessarily make the Nazir impure. Again, there seems to be three opinions here. The third opinion is based on a tradition from the last prophets of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Okay, so let's continue on Daf 53. We mentioned that the Nazir shaves for all these things except for the bone the size of a barley. And if he touches, again, these things, he becomes impure, but not ohel, meaning these things that we just mentioned are too small to create impurity in an enclosure. They have to be actually touched. From here, we're going to talk about other things that could make a Nazir impure. There's something called an even sochechit, and this is an overhanging stone. It's in the public domain. It's basically like jutting out of a of the wall, in a public domain, and there's a corpse under one of them, and then the Nazir isn't sure if he walked under that stone or not. This would be what we call safek tuma, right? Meaning impurity that we're in doubt about. We're not sure if the Nazir walked under that stone. And therefore the Nazir does not shave for this safek, this doubt. He does shave, as we mentioned, for half a kav of bones, but not a quarter of a kav. And again, everything that we said, all the things we mentioned, the bones, a half a log of blood, and again, a limb from a dead person or from a live person. These are not going to make him impure. A sealed tomb. So a sealed tomb is going to make a person impure. What do I mean? If there is at least a tefach, right? A tefach is a hand breadth. If there's at least a tefach space between the dead person, the body, and whatever the person is buried in, let's say the coffin, so that creates impurity and it doesn't get sealed in, meaning the impurity goes up and down. Down is generally not a problem, but up is a problem, which means that the Daf 54 tells us that this impurity goes up and down, which means that if you walk over this grave, you become impure. Again, it's important for me to say that for nowadays, when we don't have the temple, this is not really an issue. Most people are tamemet, are impure, because they've been either in contact with, have been in a cemetery. This really is not problematic for nowadays. However, as we're discussing Masechet Nazir, if a person is a Nazir, that would be problematic, right? The Nazir is not allowed to become Tameh Met, so too a priest, a Kohen, right? Therefore, a Kohen generally does not go to the cemetery. If they need to, they tend to be, in the street or on the edge where they are not going to accidentally walk over a grave. This is the reason, right? The reason is that the impurity goes up from the grave. Therefore, if you walk over it, you will become impure. Now, so too, because this is called a sealed grave, even if you walk over part of the grave, but the actual body is not there, right? So let's say if the coffin is this big, but the body is smaller, even if you walk over where the coffin is, that also projects tum'ah. It also projects the impurity. Okay. Um, as we said again, okay, so now the Gemara says that let's say the Nazir becomes impure, when does the Nazir who's impure start his count again, right? So when a Nazir becomes impure, the count stops, we lose the days that came beforehand, and we restart the count. So the Gemara asks, is it on the seventh day? So just to remind ourselves, the purification process, the Nazir will shave their head. They get sprinkled on day 3, and then on day 7, and then on day 8 they bring a korban, a sacrifice. So the question is, do they start counting the Nazirut from day 7, when that's really the end of the purification process? Or do they have to wait till day 8 when they bring the sacrifices? So the Mishnah says you start counting right away. Therefore, this seems to imply right away after the sacrifices, and you start on the 8th day and not the 7th day. Okay. Okay. The next Mishnah discusses cases where a Nazir does come into contact with something that potentially can make them impure, but in these particular situations, the Nazir does not go through the purification process, meaning they don't shave and they don't lose the days that they were counting. So, the sorry, the first case is overhanging branches. Right? So if you have a tree, we actually had this in Queens. There was a Jewish cemetery on the side of the road, and there were trees that went, half the tree went over the side of the cemetery, and the other half of the side of the tree went over the street. And it was actually a problem for a Kohen to walk on the street because the overhang creates an ohel, and that is problematic. But here, our case is that there's an overhanging branch, but the Nazir doesn't know if he passed under the branch that was over the corpse, meaning did he actually pass under the problematic branch? That is the issue. Also, those projecting stones that I mentioned before from the wall. The other is, if you remember the concept of a beit hapras. Beit Hapras is a field where there was a grave, and then they forgot that there was a grave there, and they plow the field, and that basically scatters the bones all throughout the field. So the idea is that even if you walked in the field, you're not sure if you walked over a place where there was a bone. Um, Okay, here the next category is chutz la'aretz, which means any country outside of Israel. Don't get upset yet. But here the sages said, or they decreed, that the land outside of Israel is impure. We're going to discuss what this means, and we'll discuss it in a minute in the Gemara. Next, the cover and the walls of a grave. Um, these are the stones that cover the grave, and a revi'it of blood, and a quarter kav of bones. Again, this is a smaller amount than we mentioned before. Therefore, they are going to convey impurity, but not strong enough to make the Nazir tamemet, that he has to shave and do the whole process. Um, and also, the last thing is vessels that touched a dead body, and a leper, a mitzorah, right? All of these things, if a Nazir touched these things, so they do become impure, but they don't need to shave and bring the sacrifices. And as I mentioned, they get sprinkled on day 3 and on day 7. They do not lose the previous days, and they start counting right away, um, as soon as they become pure again. If a Nazir became a Zav, remember, a Zav is a person who has an unnatural emission, or a Mitzorah, if the Nazir became, got leprosy, um, these impurities do not make, again, do not forfeit the days of the Nazir, and the Nazir continues counting all the way through. Even though they're impure, they're not impure from a dead body, for tumat met, and therefore the Nazir continues on counting. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to go through each of these cases. The tree, the schach, the tree over the ground. Again, we said the branch which had a dead body under it. We're not sure, again, which branch the Nazir went under. So too with the stones that are protruding from the wall. Okay, let's get to our controversial statement. Chutz la'aretz, which means any country outside of Israel, is impure. What does that mean? So the Gemara asks, is it that we're talking about the airspace, and there's something about being outside of Israel that makes a person impure? And here the Gemara seems to imply that it does not mean real impurity. It means that the sages were trying to discourage Jews from leaving Israel and from going to other countries. Therefore, they said, if you go, you become impure. Or is it that there's something physically in the dirt, the earth of outside of Israel that will make you impure? And here the question is, maybe people buried dead bodies, in various places. One midrash, one explanation is that after Noach, right after the great flood, basically there were bodies that were buried all over the world, but I guess not in Israel, and therefore wherever you walk there might be a dead body, and that's why you would be impure. But again, so that's our machloket. Like, is it real or is it just figurative? So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute, the Nazir, if he goes out of Israel, do they need to be sprinkled on 3 and 7, meaning do they get sprinkled? If that's the case, so then it really means that we're concerned that there are dead bodies there. And the Gemara says no. The Nazir does not get sprinkled on. It's just a decree. It's not uh, physically going to give you impurity. I guess not physically, but spiritually, but not really. It's more of a philosophical concept than a real concept. So the Gemara continues on Daf 55. Right, it's a machloket if a person enters. Right, if a person goes out of Israel and they're in a closed trunk. Right, we've seen this before. I don't think that people walked around in closed trunks. I think this is more theoretical, right? If I can construct a case where you don't step on the ground, did you become impure or not? So the Gemara says, is the person impure? Again, is it airspace or the actual dirt? The Gemara says no. Everyone agrees it's actually the dirt, meaning we're concerned that there are dead bodies buried all over the place and not marked. And here the machloket would be if the trunk itself, if you're moving it, does it create an ohel or not? Right? Does a moving ohel count as an ohel? Again, an ohel literally means tent, but it means like if I'm moving and the trunk goes over a dead body, does it create an ohel? So the Gemara says no, that can't be the case. It must be, we have to go back to our original assumption that it's really just a decree. Everybody knows it's really just about the airspace. And the question is there a decree if the person went in a trunk, right? Obviously, this is not a common way to travel. And therefore, is there a decree on that or not? So the Gemara asks, right, if you go in a trunk to outside of Israel, you will remain pure. You do not become impure. But if you go by ship or a wagon, those are the common ways to go, you do become impure. If you stick your head and most of your body outside of the trunk, you also become impure. Again, this shows that it's about the airspace. The days of okay, the days of being a leper, a mitzorah, don't count for the Nizirut, only for right the 30 days of Nizirut. But if it's a long Nizirut, they do count, and this seems to imply that we're talking about um, um, the idea of having to shave your head. Again, a person who is a mitzorah, who gets leprosy, must shave actually their entire body. As we know, this is problematic for the Nazir. Therefore, if it happens in the middle of a short Nazirut process, then they have to wait another 30 days so that the hair has grown back. If you're in a 100-day Nizirut and it happens at the beginning, you still have more than 30 days for the hair to grow back. Okay, now we get a challenging case. The Gemara asks, what if a Nazir wasn't sure if he became tameh, right? It's called safek tum'ah. There's a doubt if they became impure, and there's a doubt if they have tzara'at, if they have leprosy. What do? So the Gemara on the top of 56 says they can eat from the sacrificial meat from kodshim after 60 days, and they can drink wine and become impure, meaning they end the Nizirut process after 120 days. So just to explain how this works, basically, as we know, right, to become pure from the mitzorah, from having tzarat, you need to shave your entire body, and you shave twice, the beginning of the process and the end of the process. And this shaving overrides the Nizirut, right? So if you're in the middle, you have a problem. So how does it work? But if you have a doubt, it doesn't necessarily override the Nizirut. So what do? So basically, you need to wait 30 days, and then that completes the Nizirut, and then you shave, and maybe you're pure, um, and maybe you had tsarat, so then you keep shaving, and basically, the Gemara goes through all of the ramifications, how it gets to various processes of shaving, waiting 30 days, shaving, waiting 30 days, because maybe you were a leper, maybe you were impure, and only at the end can you do the last 30 days of the Nizirut. So it only ends at the end of 120 days. Um, but if the Nizirut was for 30 days, right? That's the minimum. However, if the Nazir was a Nazir for longer, right? So let's say the Nazir was for um, a year. So now he can only eat from the sacrificial meat, right? He only becomes pure after 2 years, and he ends the Nizirut after 4 years, right? Because you keep having to do another year and another year and another year and shaving in the middle. So that is our doubt case, which is a little bit complicated, but I think very interesting. Um, okay. The As we mentioned, the days of the zav or zava, right? If there was a an unnatural emission, those days you still become impure, but in a different way. So those days count as part of the nizirut. Okay. Next Mishnah on Daf 56. If the Nazir is impure, and he needs to shave his head. You cannot go to the temple, um, and right, because he is and he can't go to the temple. Sorry, 1 second. If he doesn't need to shave, then he is not. I see. Sorry. If a Nazir touched something that is as severe enough to make them have to shave, then that means the person is so impure that they cannot go to the temple. If they're on a lesser level of impurity, right, that doesn't need for the person to shave, then they're not liable for going to the temple in that state of impurity. Again, because it's generally because of a doubt. Um, Rabbi Meir says, no, you are liable. Even if you're on a lower level of impurity, you're still liable for going to the temple in this uh, state. The Gemara says that we have the same idea, but quoting a different teacher. And it seems that the Gemara teaches us here that any teaching that has three or more um, people who transmitted it one to the other, you only quote the first and the last, and you don't have to quote the people in the middle. Um, okay, next Mishnah. If a Nazir shaves for touching a barley sized bone, um, even if it doesn't transmit the impurity because of an OL, then this is basically a question that Rabbi Akiva asked two rabbis. He asks um, Rabbi Eliezer, right, can we learn one thing from the other? Meaning, a Nazir who touches a bone, a very small bone, he does become impure and needs to shave. Therefore, maybe a revi'it of blood should also make the Nazir shave. And we know that it does not. So the question is why? Why can't we learn one from the other? Rabbi Eliezer says we don't learn a kal vachomer here. just to review, kal vachomer means when I compare two things, one stringent and one lenient, I can learn, right, if this is the case with X, it must be the case with Y. And Rabbi Eliezer says, um, um, that we don't learn that connection. And Rabbi Yoshua says, um, great idea, that would be very nice, but we don't learn a this type of law from comparison to another type of law. Meaning, one of them is learned what's called halacha le Moshe misinai, meaning it was taught to Moshe on Har Sinai, meaning it's not necessarily based in the text, it's a tradition that we have, and therefore we cannot learn one from the other because they are not comparable. On Daf 57, the Gemara asks, which one? Is it the bone or the blood? Which one is the halacha le Moshe misinai, the one that came from tradition, and which one was learnt from logic? And the Gemara concludes that the bone is halacha le Moshe misinai, and the revi'it, the quarter of blood, is kal v'chomer, and we cannot learn one from the other. Okay, with that we finish the 7th chapter. We are going to learn the last daf for today now, daf 57, and begin a new chapter. So that's it for dead bodies for this exact moment. But here we have the next case. The next case is that we have two Nazirim, and they're standing together, and a person comes up to them and says, I saw one of you, and one of you became impure. And I'm not sure which one became impure. Again, here we have a safek. We're not sure which one became impure. So what do we do? So the Mishnah explains that they finish their nizirut, meaning they count the 30 days. Then they both shave their heads and they bring two sets of sacrifices. One as if they were impure, one of them, and the other as if they are pure, right? Because one of them is pure and one of them is impure. And basically they each say, right, they bring these two sets of sacrifices and they say, if I'm, right, each one says, if I'm impure, then these sacrifices are for me, and the other set is for you. And the other one's, right, and then he says, if I'm pure, if I'm tahor, this set is for me, and the other set is for you, right? So we make this condition, and they bring the two sacrifices. Now, we still need to count another 30 days because the impure Nazir hasn't done 30 days of Nazirut. It was all canceled because they became impure. So now they have to count another 30 days, shave again, and bring one set of sacrifices. And again, they say, right, if I was impure before, then the impure set of sacrifices then were mine, and this set is mine as well because now I'm pure. But if I was pure beforehand, so then this set of sacrifices is for the other person, right? Because they're bringing them together. Okay, so now the Gemara explains what's going on here. So first we're going to discuss the concept of a doubtful impurity, right? Safek tum'ah. We have a rule that if there is a doubt about impurity in Reshut Harabim, in the public domain, we say that it is pure because it's public and we just say it's pure. If we have the same question but in a private domain, we say that it is impure. right? The way we say this is, right, safek tum'ah in Reshuta Rabim is tahor, it's pure. Safek tuma in Reshuta Yachid, in a private domain, is tameh. So now the Gemara wants to ask, wait a minute. We said that there are two Nazirim plus a witness. So that makes three people. Three people makes it a public thing. And if there's a doubt in a public area, nobody should be impure. We should say that everybody is pure. So the Gemara says, no, it must be that the witness is not standing with the um, the two Nazirim. The two Nazirim are here, and the witness was a block away. And the witness says, oh, I saw that, let's say, something impure was kind of thrown in your direction, but he wasn't standing there. And now it's only two people. So if it's two people, that makes it a private domain. Therefore, when we have a doubt, they are going to be tameh. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Why? How could they both shave? Right? At the end of the process, you said that they both have to shave, but only one of them really needs to shave. And we know that it's problematic for a man to shave his head completely. There is a verse in the Torah that says, right, lo tokifu pe'at roshchem, you're not allowed to shave your head, and lo tashchit pe'at ziknechem, you're not allowed to remove the corners of your beard. We're going to get back to that in a minute. So the Gemara suggests one opinion is, oh, we're talking about women or children, right? Women and children do not have a prohibition from shaving their heads. So all you women, if you want to shave your head, you can. There's no prohibition. Or a child. So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. But to shave a child, meaning if a man who has a prohibition to shave, it might be problematic, even if he's only shaving a child. So the Gemara says that right, really, maybe you are impure. You have transgressed if an adult male shaves a child. And from here, there's actually a pretty terrible story. I'll tell you because it's there, but basically Rav Huna says that because it's problematic for him to shave his son's head, it seems, it's not clear to me. I guess everyone shaved their heads in those days. It wasn't clear, maybe because of lice. But the Rav Ada bar Ava asks him, who shaves your kids' heads? Right, because you're not allowed to. So he says, oh, my wife does it. And then basically Rav Ada bar Ava felt that was also prohibited because you are not allowed to, again, even if it's a minor, she shouldn't be shaving his head, and basically cursed basically Rav Huna and his family, and says that your children basically should die, and a terrible, terrible thing. And actually, that's what happens. And I think it's just a terrible story. First of all, let me just be clear. The Gemara is very critical of this story. The Gemara does not see it as a problem. And the Gemara, meaning of that the wife shaved the head of the kids. The Gemara is very critical of Rav Ada bar Ava cursing Rav Huna and his family. It is a terrible thing. And I think that here the Gemara is trying to say, again, as we've said before many times, one must be very careful with the words that they use, right? Even if you don't mean something, if you say things, and definitely in the time of the Gemara, again, I'm not sure if literally or figuratively, their words have power. And therefore, when Rav Ada bar Ava makes this curse, it actually comes true. So I think here the Gemara is trying to teach us, be very careful with what you say, because you never know the effects that it will have. But really a terrible story. And the last thing for today is this idea of shaving the head of a man is a prohibition, and it's connected to a beard. Therefore, anybody who can grow a beard is not allowed to shave their head, but anyone who does not grow a beard, i.e., women or children, they do not have the prohibition of shaving their head. So, with that, we end today's today's daf. We might even be. I'm not sure if we finish next week or the week after, but I think we might be finishing next week. I have to look at my calendar. So that's very exciting. I see we have a few minutes left, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes.
What happened to the two witness requirement? What's with the one witness deciding if someone is impure or not?
That is an excellent question. Excellent. Um, Here, it is not in a court. Um,
Oh,
so
okay.
because it's not in a court, it's not seen as real testimony. It's more saying, "Oh, I saw something happen to you, and you definitely want to know about it because it affects your status." So that is an excellent question. So it does have bearing on your status. It would not have bearing in court. So yeah, excellent question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah.
It's not very well formulated, but it has been on my mind for a while. I remember the Talmudic story. I think it was Rabbi Yochanan, someone who'd lost 10 children and carried around a bone the size of a barley seed, um, in order to show others that he has proof of this horrible suffering in case he needed to counsel others about suffering. And all of that is just to say I'm very confused about whether that made him tameh or not, or if that, I just wondered. Any ideas?
Interesting. Interesting. I definitely remember the story. It could be that maybe it was maybe smaller than a barley seed. If it is smaller, it would not convey impurity. So that might be an issue. That might be the case. It could also just be that, again, it's post temple, and therefore, even though in general it's not good to constantly be impure, it is less problematic because, in essence, we're all basically impure. It could be that, again, I'm not sure, but it could be it's less problematic just because he wasn't a Kohen, and it's not in the time of the temple. So maybe that's what it was. But also another terribly tragic story.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kodesh
One,
Tov.
yes, Chodesh Tov this week. Tomorrow night and Thursday are Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which means 2 weeks till Pesach. Very crazy, but exciting. So really wishing everyone a Chodesh Tov, a wonderful week, and see you next week, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.